Hello, everyone. I hope you're somewhere quiet tonight. Maybe lying in bed, maybe listening with the lights low and your thoughts drifting like smoke in the dark. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from? What time is it where you are right now? I always find it fascinating to imagine people scattered across the world, connected by the same quiet moment, the same story whispering through their headphones. Tonight, I want to take you somewhere far away in time, to a place of heat, dust, and slow-moving shadows. To America, sometime around the year 1832. A time when freedom was not something everyone could claim. When the air itself seemed heavy with sorrow and secrets. And when the night was the only time people could truly breathe. Our story begins on a plantation deep in Georgia, acres upon acres of cotton, stretching as far as the eye could see. During the day, the fields shimmered white, the sun glaring down with an almost cruel brightness. But at night, it was a different world. The cotton turned silver in the moonlight, and the air filled with the low hum of crickets and the distant croak of frogs. It smelled of damp earth and sweat and smoke from dying fires. That night, Samuel lay awake in the small wooden cabin he shared with 6 others. The air was thick, and even though the sun had set hours ago, the heat still clung to his skin. He could hear breathing slow and heavy from the others around him, some muttering in their sleep, others dead silent. But Samuel couldn't rest. Something in the night had caught his ear. A sound, faint, far away, but unmistakably human. A voice. A whisper. He sat up slowly, straining to listen. At first, he thought it was the wind brushing through the cane, but then he heard it again, a low hum, rising and falling, like a melody too fragile to survive daylight. Someone was singing. The song was old, older than the fields, older than the house that loomed up the hill where the master slept. It was a song that had crossed the ocean long ago, carried in the memory of people who had been taken from their homes and thrown into a world that refused to see them as human. No one knew where the song truly began, but everyone knew what it meant. Freedom. Hope. A promise hidden in sound. Samuel closed his eyes and listened. The melody wove through the darkness, and for a moment, it almost felt like a hand reaching out to him from another world. It said, "You are not alone. You are not forgotten." He wanted to follow the voice, to see who it belonged to, but he didn't dare. The rules were simple here. When night fell, you stayed inside. If you were caught wandering, there would be questions. If there were questions, there would be pain. Still, curiosity burned in him like a coal that wouldn't die. He turned his head toward the cracks in the cabin wall. Through them, he could see the faint shimmer of the moonlight falling on the fields. Somewhere out there, someone was awake. Someone was singing softly enough to hide the meaning in the air. He thought of the day that had passed. Of the endless rows of cotton plants, each one a small white cloud he'd been forced to pick until his fingers bled. Of the overseer's horse pacing behind them, the sound of the whip slicing the silence like thunder. Of the heat that never let go, that turned every breath into labor. He thought of Mama June, the old woman who worked beside him in the fields. Her hands were cracked like old leather, and her back bent, but her eyes were alive, bright with something no one could take away. She had told him once that the night was sacred, that in the dark, when the master slept, the world belonged to them again. "It's the only time the Lord hears us clear," she'd said, pressing a finger to her lips. "So you hush your heart and listen. The night talks if you know how." And so Samuel listened. He listened to the hum of insects, the distant hoot of an owl, the sigh of the trees swaying in the hot breeze. He listened for footsteps, for danger, for secrets. But what he heard most of all was the slow rhythmic beat of his own heart, steady and alive, a quiet rebellion in itself. He thought of the stories he'd heard from others, stories whispered during rest breaks or traded in secret by the fire. Stories of a road that led north, where the air was cold and no man could own another. Stories of rivers that hid travelers in their mist, and of stars that pointed the way to freedom. He didn't know if they were true, but he wanted them to be. The singing stopped suddenly. The silence that followed was so deep it almost hurt. Samuel felt the hairs rise on the back of his neck. He waited. Nothing. Then, a faint rustle, footsteps in the grass, moving away. Whoever it was, they were gone. He lay back down, eyes open to the roof above, the wooden beams etched with moonlight. He wondered if that voice had been real, or if his tired mind had dreamed it. Either way, something had changed. The night no longer felt empty. It felt alive, as if it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Samuel didn't know it then, but that small moment, that faint song drifting through the night, would be the beginning of everything that followed. The first spark in a story that would carry him far beyond the fields of Georgia, across rivers, through forests, into the uncertain light of freedom. But for now, he closed his eyes and tried to sleep. The world outside was quiet again, but deep down, something in him had started to wake. The first sound that reached Samuel was not birdsong, nor the breeze through the cane, but the crack of a whip far off in the dark. It was always that sound that marked the beginning of day, even before the sun. The call that woke the men and women from the thin layer of sleep they'd managed to find. The sound that reminded them where they were. Samuel opened his eyes to the faintest gray light bleeding in through the cracks of the cabin wall. Around him, bodies stirred slowly, groaning, coughing, pulling themselves up from straw mats. The air was heavy with the scent of sweat and smoke. Someone whispered a prayer. Someone else muttered a name, maybe a child's, maybe one already gone. He sat up carefully, his muscles aching from yesterday's labor. His fingers, still sore and split, brushed against the wooden floor, rough as old bark. He found his shirt crumpled beside him, stiff with dirt, and pulled it on. Outside, the rooster called once, twice, like a bell tolling the start of another sentence in a life without commas. When the door opened, the first breath of morning air slid in, warm already, smelling of wet earth and mule sweat. The horizon was streaked with red, and the mist rose from the fields like smoke from an invisible fire. Every morning looked the same here, a world half alive, half dreaming, waiting for the sun to rise and burn away the quiet. Samuel stepped outside. The sky above the fields was pale, the stars fading like old memory. The others filed out behind him, their faces blank with that look of endurance learned too early and kept too long. Mama June was there, tying a rag around her head, her voice low as she spoke to no one in particular. "Lord, give me back my bones at the end of this day," she murmured. She caught Samuel's glance and gave a small nod, the kind that said both "I see you" and "don't speak." They walked together toward the fields, feet sinking into the soft dirt. Around them, the plantation began to wake. The creak of wagon wheels, the shuffle of chains on tools, the bark of the overseer's dog echoing through the fog. The sun crept up slow and red, heavy as blood. By the time it cleared the tree line, the picking had already begun. The fields glowed white, each cotton boll glistening with dew, each one a tiny lie of purity hiding the pain beneath. Samuel bent to the work automatically, fingers moving on memory. Pluck, twist, drop, step. The rhythm was endless, a cruel lullaby that filled the body until the mind drifted far away. Sometimes he would let his thoughts wander, not far, never far, just enough to remember another sound, another smell. The way rain had once sounded on the roof of his mother's hut when he was a boy, before he was sold away. The smell of smoke from the river barges. The sound of laughter he couldn't quite recall the face behind. But here, thoughts were dangerous. Too many could slow your hands. Slow hands meant punishment. And so, the body worked and the mind hid. By mid-morning, the sun was merciless. Heat shimmered over the fields, blurring everything into a haze. The overseer rode up and down the rows, his eyes cold, his voice a whip by itself. A horsefly landed on Samuel's neck. He didn't dare brush it off. Sweat dripped down his temples, salt stinging his eyes. Next to him, Mama June hummed under her breath, the same low tune he'd heard the night before. Samuel almost stopped. The sound rose softly, steady as a heartbeat, weaving through the air between them. It wasn't the same voice from the dark, but it carried the same secret inside it. He looked at her, and she met his eyes just long enough to whisper, "Keep your ears open tonight." And then she turned away, her hands moving faster, the conversation already erased by the motion of work. The rest of the day blurred. The heat grew heavier, the cries sharper. Once, a young man in another row dropped to his knees and didn't get up. The overseer rode over, shouted something Samuel couldn't hear, then struck the ground beside him. The sound was too much like thunder. After that, no one looked up again. When the bell finally rang to end the day, the light was gold and fading. The air cooled only slightly, enough to bring back the smell of the river in the distance. The slaves walked back in silence, each step leaving small dark prints in the dust. Their shadows stretched long behind them, reaching out toward the horizon like they were trying to escape. Inside the cabin, the same slow rituals began. Food passed around in tin bowls, the quiet murmur of voices too tired to speak loud. Samuel ate without tasting, his hands trembling slightly from exhaustion. When the bowl was empty, he leaned back against the wall and listened again. The night outside thickened, and the same question filled his mind. Who had been singing last night? And why had Mama June told him to listen again? He waited, watching the window crack as moonlight returned to the fields. The others drifted off one by one, their breathing settling into rhythm. Hours passed. Nothing. Only the steady whisper of the wind. Then, just when he'd begun to think he'd imagined it all, a sound floated through the dark, faint but there. Not a song this time. A knock. 3 slow taps, on the far side of the cabin wall. Samuel froze. Then from outside, a voice, quiet, no louder than breath. "You ready to listen now?" The voice was barely more than a whisper, rough as gravel, but it cut straight through the silence. Samuel's heart thudded once, hard. He didn't move. Didn't speak. Just sat there, staring at the wall where the sound had come from. The others in the cabin were still asleep, the low murmur of breath filling the space like waves. Somewhere outside, a cricket sang, stopped, then started again. He waited, thinking maybe he'd dreamed it. But then it came again, 3 slow taps. Samuel rose, careful not to wake anyone. He moved to the far corner, crouched by the wall. Through a gap in the boards, the moonlight caught a face. Only a sliver, but enough to see dark skin, eyes that flicked quick and sharp. "Who's there?" Samuel whispered. "Keep quiet," the voice said. "Name's Isaac. You don't know me. You don't need to. I'm just passing through." Samuel's pulse quickened. Passing through? No one passed through here, not unless they were brought, or born. The man leaned close. "You heard that song last night?" Samuel nodded slowly. "That was me. Didn't mean to scare nobody. Just letting folks know I'm here for a spell. You got ears, boy. You listen close. You hear what the night's saying. There's paths out there, if you're brave enough to walk them." Before Samuel could ask anything else, Isaac was gone, vanished back into the dark as though he'd never been. The only thing left was the whisper of grass shifting in the wind. Samuel stayed by the wall for a long time, staring into nothing, his thoughts tumbling over one another. Paths out there. Brave enough to walk them. He lay down again but didn't sleep. The sky outside turned from black to blue, and somewhere far away a rooster crowed. When morning came, he moved like a man half awake. The sun rose cruel and bright. Another day began. But everything felt different now, slightly tilted, as though some invisible line had been crossed during the night. By the time the fields filled with workers, the air already shimmered with heat. The overseer's horse snorted, stamping at flies. Mama June worked a few rows over, her hands moving with the speed of years. Samuel wanted to tell her about Isaac, but her eyes met his, and she gave the smallest shake of her head. Not now. Not here. Around midday, a shout broke the monotony, short, sharp, and filled with fury. Everyone froze. Down by the western rows, the overseer was dismounting. A man stood there, trembling, holding a sack of cotton that had spilled open. Samuel didn't know him well, a tall man called Ellis, quiet, strong. The overseer was shouting about stolen cotton, about laziness, about disrespect. Samuel felt the air tighten, the way it always did before the storm. He looked away, but the sound came anyway, the heavy crack of leather slicing air, then flesh. Once. Twice. 3 times. And then the silence that followed, thick and electric. The sky above was cloudless, cruelly blue. A hawk circled far overhead, unbothered. Samuel's fingers kept moving automatically, plucking, twisting, dropping. He didn't dare stop. The sound of the whip lingered long after it ended. It didn't just live in the air, it sank into the skin, into the bones. It became part of the rhythm of life itself. That night, after the day finally died, Samuel sat outside the cabin a little longer than usual. The stars were bright, scattered across the velvet black sky. He looked up at them, remembering something his mother had said long ago, that those same stars had guided their people long before they were brought here, that they still remembered the way home. He wondered if that was what Isaac meant by paths out there. The stars, the river, the night itself. He heard footsteps behind him. Mama June sat down slowly beside him, her old knees cracking like dry sticks. She said nothing for a long while, just breathed in the night air. Finally, she spoke. "You seen him, didn't you?" Samuel nodded. "Who is he?" She looked out at the fields, the moonlight painting her face silver. "Man who walks between worlds, between here and the north. Brings word, sometimes takes folk. Not often. It's dangerous work. He been doin' it long as I been breathin'." Samuel hesitated. "Why'd he talk to me?" She smiled, but it was a sad smile, thin and worn. "Maybe he seen something in you. Maybe he just needed ears that still listen. Most folks stop listenin' after a while. Too much pain makes people deaf." A whip cracked somewhere in the distance, not in punishment this time, just as a call to the night riders checking fences. The sound echoed like thunder rolling over hills. Samuel flinched, but Mama June didn't move. "You keep your eyes on that sky," she said softly. "Ain't just stars up there. There's messages if you know how to read 'em. The Lord wrote the first map in the heavens, so the lost could find their way." He followed her gaze upward. The stars seemed to shimmer differently tonight, like they were leaning closer. The Big Dipper tilted on its handle, the North Star steady above the horizon. He didn't know if he believed in signs, but something inside him stirred. Later, back in the cabin, he lay awake again. The world felt restless, humming quietly beneath the surface. Somewhere out there, Isaac was moving. Through the trees, through the cane, through the shadowed world that ordinary eyes couldn't see. Samuel felt the same restlessness growing in him. He didn't yet have a plan. Only a question, pulsing louder each night. What if the world is bigger than these fields? What if there's still a way to live without chains? The moon drifted higher, washing the world in silver. The air smelled of earth and smoke and distant rain. He closed his eyes, listening for the song again. It didn't come. But he could still hear the echo of the whip, fading into the sky, and beneath it, softer but stronger, the whisper of a promise he didn't yet understand. That night did not end for Samuel. He drifted in and out of half-sleep, the kind where every creak and murmur feels like a hand on your shoulder. Outside, the wind had risen. It moved through the fields like breath through a sleeping body, stirring the cotton and bending the cane. The moonlight shimmered on the stalks, pale and ghostly. The whisper of the whip still echoed in his mind, but something else had taken root beneath it, a quiet, steady pull. Isaac's words repeated over and over, "There are paths out there, if you brave enough to walk them." When the morning bell clanged, Samuel rose with the others, body sore but mind sharper than it had ever been. He watched faces, tired, empty, resigned. But behind a few of them, he noticed something new. A flicker, a glance that lingered a second too long, a hum that carried meaning beneath its sound. There was a language here, he realized, one that had nothing to do with words. A twitch of the hand, a line in a song, the way someone tied their headcloth or touched their chest. Codes. Warnings. Invitations. He'd never noticed them before, or maybe he hadn't been ready to see. The day passed heavy and hot. Sweat ran down his back, soaked his shirt. The overseer's voice carried over the field like thunder, but Samuel barely heard him. He was listening to other sounds now, the rhythm of feet, the breaks in conversation, the faint call-and response that seemed ordinary until you heard the pauses. By the time the sun began to fall, painting the sky gold and red, he'd caught fragments. A name whispered like a ghost, Isaac. A phrase that meant more than it should have. Follow the river when the sky bleeds. Another voice, low and quick, a mark carved in the cypress. He didn't understand it all, but he didn't need to. He only needed to listen. That evening, after work, he found Mama June by the well, her arms trembling from drawing the last bucket of water. He helped her set it down, the rope rough against his hands. "You heard what folks sayin'?" she asked without looking at him. "Bits," Samuel said quietly. "Can't make sense of it yet." "You ain't supposed to, not yet," she said. "Ain't safe to know too much for your time. Words can be dangerous when you don't know how to carry 'em." She leaned close. "But you keep listenin'. When the right night comes, you'll know." He wanted to ask more, but she raised a hand. "No questions now. Just watch the trees. The trees talk truer than men." That night, the air was thicker than usual, the kind that stuck to the skin and carried the smell of rain. Thunder grumbled far off. Samuel sat outside after the others had gone in, eyes scanning the horizon. The river was just beyond the line of trees, its slow current reflecting the last light of the moon. He thought he saw movement there, a flicker of shadow. He rose quietly, heart hammering, and walked toward it. The sound of frogs swelled louder, masking his footsteps. The closer he got, the stronger the smell of water and mud. At the edge of the trees, he stopped. There, carved into the bark of a cypress tree, was a symbol, simple, small, but deliberate. Two lines crossing, one curved like a crescent. The wood was fresh, sap still glistening. Isaac had been here. He reached out and touched the mark. It was nothing, really, just scratches in bark. But it felt like a door, like something was waiting beyond it. Behind him, the wind shifted. A shape moved out from the shadows. "You came," said Isaac. Samuel turned. The man looked the same, lean, sharp-eyed, wearing a tattered hat and carrying a small satchel over his shoulder. His voice was calm, but his eyes never stopped moving. "I figured you'd come lookin' once you saw the sign," Isaac said. "Most don't notice it, or pretend not to." Safer that way. Samuel swallowed. What's it mean? Isaac crouched by the tree and traced the mark with his finger. Means there's talk. Means there's folks movin'. Upriver, through the pines, past the swamp. Ain't no road, just signs like this. But if you follow 'em long enough, he looked up, eyes catching the moonlight, you might just find your way north. Samuel felt his pulse quicken. You mean the railroad? The one folks whisper about? Isaac smiled faintly. Ain't no train you can see, boy. Ain't made of iron or steam. It's made of people. Hearts and hands and courage. You see a lantern burnin' in the woods, you follow it. You hear the right song hummin' low, you listen. It's all connected. He pulled something from his pocket, a small scrap of fabric, dark blue, with a star stitched in white thread. You see one of these, means safe place. But don't touch it unless you sure. There's eyes everywhere. Samuel took the cloth carefully. It felt like holding a secret. Isaac straightened. You ain't ready to run yet. Not alone. You learn the songs first. You learn the stars. You keep your head low. When the time's right, you'll know. The rain began then, soft at first, tapping on the leaves. Lightning flashed far off. Isaac stepped back into the shadows, voice fading as he went. Follow the river when the sky bleeds, Samuel. Remember that. And then he was gone again, swallowed by the storm. Samuel stood there for a long while, the rain soaking his clothes, the sound of thunder rolling closer. He felt no fear, only a strange calm, like the earth itself had whispered something to him. He looked up. The sky had opened wide now, the rain silver in the moonlight. The clouds glowed faintly red at their edges, bleeding, just as Isaac had said. He turned back toward the cabins, clutching the piece of cloth tight in his hand. Each drop of rain felt like a heartbeat against his skin. For the first time in his life, Samuel did not feel trapped inside the world he'd been given. He felt as if he'd just stepped into another one, hidden beneath the same sky, alive with secrets waiting to be found. The rain came harder through the night, drumming on the roofs like 1,000 beating drums. The air was thick with the smell of wet earth and moss, the kind that clings to your skin and stays in your lungs. Inside the cabin, everyone slept heavy, worn out from the day's labor, their breathing slow and deep. But Samuel lay awake, staring at the faint light that seeped through the cracks. He turned the small piece of fabric in his hands, the one Isaac had given him. The blue cloth was darker now, damp from the rain, but the white star still gleamed faintly in the dim light. He traced the thread with his finger over and over, as if doing so could make sense of what was happening. Follow the river when the sky bleeds. The sky had bled that night. Red clouds torn open by lightning. He couldn't shake the feeling that it had been meant for him. When the storm finally eased and the thunder drifted away, Samuel sat up. The others were still asleep. The world outside was quiet again, but not calm. It was a waiting kind of quiet, the kind that hums beneath the surface. He stood, heart thudding softly, and slipped outside. The ground was slick with mud, each step sinking deep. The moon had vanished behind clouds, leaving the world half dark, half silver. The air buzzed with insects and the distant croak of frogs. He moved toward the sound of the river. It wasn't far, you could hear it even from the fields on still nights, but he had never gone there alone before. It was forbidden. Everything was forbidden after dark. But fear didn't seem to matter anymore. Something else was stronger now, the pull of that whisper, the memory of Isaac's voice, the promise of something unseen. The trees closed around him as he walked. Spanish moss hung down in long gray curtains, brushing his shoulders. Every now and then, lightning flickered far away, lighting the trunks white for a heartbeat before plunging them back into shadow. When he reached the river, the sight stole his breath. It wound through the forest like a black ribbon, its surface smooth as glass. The rain had swelled it, and it moved faster now, silent but powerful. The moon broke through the clouds for a moment, laying a silver path across the water. And there, at the bend where the roots of a cypress reached into the current, a light flickered. Samuel froze. A lantern. Hanging low, half hidden by the reeds. The flame inside wavered, dim but steady. He remembered what Isaac had said, "You see a lantern burnin' in the woods, you follow it." He took a step closer. The mud sucked at his feet, pulling him down, but he pressed forward. When he reached the light, he saw footprints, small ones bare, leading into the trees. He followed them. After a few minutes, he began to hear something else, a murmur, low and rhythmic. Voices. Many of them. He stopped behind a cluster of trees and peered through. In a small clearing by the riverbank, about a dozen people stood together. Men and women, some young, some gray-haired, their clothes soaked from the storm. They were standing in a loose circle, heads bowed. A woman was humming softly, the same kind of tune he'd heard nights ago, slow, mournful, but threaded with something alive beneath it. Samuel watched, hardly breathing. The woman lifted her head slightly as she sang, her voice carrying across the clearing. "Wade in the water. Wade in the water, children." The others joined in, their voices low but strong, blending with the hiss of the river. Samuel knew that song. Everyone did. It was sung during work sometimes, or when a baby was born, or when someone died. But now, hearing it here in the dark, he understood that it meant something more. Something hidden. Isaac stepped out from behind the group, his hat dripping with rain. He met Samuel's eyes, and a faint smile crept across his face. "Didn't think you'd come," he said softly. "But here you are." The others turned, some startled, some simply curious. Isaac raised a hand. "He's all right. He's one of us." A few nodded. Others watched him quietly. Samuel stepped closer, feeling the mud slide beneath his feet. "What is this?" he whispered. Isaac looked out at the river. "This is where we remember we ain't just what they call us. This is where we plan. Where we pray. Where we talk about what freedom sounds like." He gestured toward the water. That river's carried more secrets than any preachers ever told. Folks been followin' it north for years. Some made it. Some didn't. But every time one makes it, the river remembers. The woman who had been singing, her name was Ada, Samuel later learned, took his hand gently. "You feel that?" she asked, guiding his palm toward the current. "That's life movin'. Can't stop it. You can dam it up, you can whip it, but it'll always find a way through." The water was cold, rushing over his fingers. He looked at Ada, then at the others, faces tired but burning with quiet determination. For the first time in his life, Samuel saw people who didn't look beaten. They looked alive. Isaac crouched near the water, drawing lines in the mud. "We meet when the moon's full, always by the river. The songs'll tell you when. Each one's a message. That song you just heard, that means it's time to move." "Move where?" Samuel asked. "Not tonight," Isaac said. "Soon. When the signs line up. When the sky bleeds again." They stayed there until the stars began to fade, talking in low voices. Plans mixed with prayers, prayers with hope, hope with silence. Samuel didn't remember every word, but he remembered the feeling, as if the world had cracked open and something bright had slipped through. When dawn approached, they scattered, each vanishing into the trees. The lantern was doused. The clearing returned to darkness, as if nothing had ever been there. Samuel walked back to the cabins with the river's sound echoing in his ears. His clothes clung to him, his skin cold, but his heart was burning. He knew now that the whispers were real, that freedom wasn't just a story told by the old ones to help them sleep. It was a living thing, moving quietly through the night, waiting for the right moment to rise. As he reached the edge of the fields, the first light of morning touched the horizon. The cotton shimmered white again, pure and still, as if mocking the truth hidden beneath it. Samuel looked up at the paling sky and thought of the river still running, steady, patient, unstoppable. And he whispered, barely audible, "I'm listening." The days that followed passed like ghosts through fog, silent, uneasy, and full of eyes that never seemed to rest. The memory of the river still lived in Samuel's chest, like a heartbeat separate from his own. Every time he bent to pick the cotton, every time the overseer's shadow crossed his path, he could feel it there, pulsing quietly, whispering, "Wait, not yet." The weather had turned dry again, the sky pale and hard. Dust rose in thin clouds with each step, settling in their throats. The cicadas had returned too, screaming from the trees until it felt like the world itself was humming. One afternoon, as the sun burned high, Samuel was called up to the big house. It was unusual. Slaves didn't go there unless they were being punished or used for errands. He wiped his hands on his trousers and walked slowly toward the porch, feeling every gaze on him. Mrs. Whitfield stood there, fanning herself lazily. She was dressed in a gown the color of lilacs, her face hidden under a wide hat. Her eyes moved over Samuel like he was a piece of furniture she'd forgotten she owned. "Boy," she said, her voice sharp and sweet like sugar hiding glass, "take this to the smokehouse. Leave it with Mary. And don't you dare open it." She handed him a folded letter, sealed with red wax. Samuel bowed his head slightly. "Yes, ma'am." The letter was small, but heavy. He could feel the lump of the wax seal against his palm, the faint warmth of her hand still on it. As he walked away from the porch, her voice followed him. "And Samuel?" He turned. "If I find out you've been reading again, I'll see to it that you forget how." The world seemed to shrink around him for a moment. The cotton, the dirt, the burning sky, all pressing in. "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly. He turned and kept walking. The smokehouse stood behind the kitchen, a dark, windowless place that always smelled of salt and meat and smoke. Mary, the cook, wasn't there. She was probably still inside the kitchen, preparing supper for the Whitfields. Samuel stood by the door for a moment, the letter still in his hand. The red wax caught the light, a tiny glimmer in the gloom. He knew he shouldn't. He knew what would happen if he was caught. But something in him, that same quiet pulse that had led him to the river, told him to look. He glanced around. No one. The yard was empty. Even the dogs were asleep in the shade. He slipped inside the smokehouse. The air was thick, filled with hanging slabs of pork and rows of jars on dusty shelves. A small knife lay on the table, used for trimming fat. He picked it up and held it against the seal, hesitating just a breath before pressing. The wax cracked softly. He unfolded the paper. The ink had bled a little, but the words were clear. To Mr. Elijah Harrow, Charleston. I am writing to inform you that the girl Lila has borne another child, likely from the same source as before. The master is displeased and wishes it resolved quietly. I will arrange for the sale of the boy once he's weaned. The mother can remain, for now. J.W. Samuel read it twice, his eyes burning. Then a third time, slower. Lila. He knew her. She was only 16, with soft eyes and a quiet smile. She'd come from another plantation last spring. The same overseer had been watching her since the day she arrived. He felt something twist in his chest, not just anger, but something colder, something sharp and quiet. The kind of feeling that didn't burn, it cut. He folded the letter carefully, as if afraid it might scream, and resealed it by pressing the wax flat with his thumb. Then he walked out of the smokehouse, the air around him suddenly too bright, too dry. When he handed it to Mary, his hand didn't shake. That night, he sat outside the cabins long after everyone else had gone to sleep. The stars were thick above, the sky black as oil. He could hear the river faintly in the distance, calling through the trees. He thought of Lila, and the boy that would be taken from her. He thought of Isaac, of Ada, of the circle by the river where freedom had been more than a word. He thought of how Mrs. Whitfield had spoken to him, not as a person, but as a thing that needed reminding of its place. He whispered to himself, "They write letters like they write laws, with ink but they mean blood." Somewhere deep inside, something began to change shape. The quiet patience that had always been part of him, that learned to wait, to endure, began to crack. He realized that words could be dangerous things, even when written by hands that never held a plow. The next morning, the fields felt heavier. The air seemed to press down on his shoulders. He could see Lila across the rows, her belly round beneath her dress, her eyes distant. Every time the overseer passed, she looked away. Samuel wanted to tell her what he'd seen. But how? What good would it do? The letter was already gone. The decision already made. So he kept picking, one cotton boll after another, his fingers raw. But inside, his mind was running, faster than the river, sharper than the whip. When night came, he didn't go straight to sleep. He waited. Waited until the frogs began to sing and the air cooled. Then, quietly, he slipped into the woods again. The moon was thin this time, a curved blade hanging above the treetops. Isaac was waiting by the cypress, lantern low. "You came," he said softly. Samuel nodded. "There's something I need to tell you." And so he told him about the letter. About Lila. About the way the world could hide its cruelty in polite handwriting. Isaac listened, silent for a long time. Then he said, "You see now what we're up against. They don't just chain us with iron. They chain us with paper." He looked out over the water. "But that's all right. There's more ways than one to write a story." Samuel frowned. "What do you mean?" Isaac turned, his face half-lit by the lantern. "You'll see soon enough." The night deepened. The stars burned bright, reflected in the black mirror of the river. A soft wind rose, stirring the reeds. Somewhere out there, beyond the edge of what Samuel could see, the world was changing, slow, secret, and unstoppable. He didn't know it yet, but that letter, that cruel little piece of paper, would be the first stone in the landslide that would change everything. The morning broke with a strange stillness, the kind that comes before something happens. Even the cicadas were quiet, and the mist that clung to the field seemed thicker than usual, like the world was holding its breath. Samuel woke before the horn. He dreamed of the river again, of voices beneath the water, calling his name, whispering words he couldn't quite catch. When he opened his eyes, his skin was damp with sweat, though the air was cool. He lay there for a moment, listening. The cabin was silent except for the soft breathing of the others. Then, far off, came the heavy creak of wagon wheels. A horse snorted. The sound of boots followed, several pairs, moving fast. Samuel sat up. Something was wrong. When the horn finally blew, it sounded different, shorter, sharper, impatient. Within minutes, everyone was outside, lined up near the fields. The overseer, Mr. Clay, stood in front of them, his whip coiled at his side like a sleeping snake. His hat shaded most of his face, but Samuel could see the gleam in his eyes. Next to him stood two white men in dusty coats. Traders. Behind them on the wagon sat three figures, chained, silent, their faces half hidden beneath the shadow of the canvas. Samuel's stomach dropped. Clay spoke first. "Listen up. There's been thievin'. A barrel of molasses gone missin', some tobacco too. Somebody here thinks he can take what ain't his." The men in the wagon didn't move. The overseer's gaze swept across the line of workers like a knife. "You all know what happens when I find out who it was," he said. His voice was calm, almost gentle, which made it worse. He walked slowly down the line, boots sinking into the damp earth. Every few steps, he paused, studying faces. When he reached Samuel, he stopped. Clay's eyes narrowed. "You been wandering off at night, boy?" Samuel felt his pulse quicken. He kept his eyes down. "No, sir." Clay tilted his head. "You sure?" "'Cause some folks say they seen shadows movin' near the river. Say they heard singin' when there ain't supposed to be no singin'." He stepped closer. Samuel could smell the sour whiskey on his breath. "You got something you want to tell me?" Samuel shook his head. "No, sir." Clay studied him for a long moment, then smiled, the kind of smile that had no warmth. "All right then." He turned and pointed his whip toward one of the men on the wagon. "Fetch that one down." The traders obeyed. They pulled a man out, tall, thin, with gray in his beard. His wrists were raw from the chains. Samuel recognized him. Old Ben. He'd been on the plantation longer than anyone could remember. Clay looked at the crowd. This here's what happens when a man forgets his place. The whip cracked once in the air, a sound so sharp it seemed to tear the morning open. Then again, and again. The sound carried across the fields, echoing through the mist. Samuel felt every lash like it was on his own back. He stared at the ground, jaw clenched, until he couldn't bear it anymore. He looked up, and saw something he'd never forget. Ben wasn't crying out. Not once. He stood as straight as he could, his eyes fixed on something far beyond them all. His mouth moved slightly, barely audible, but Samuel caught the words. He was singing. Not loud, not strong, but enough. Enough for those who knew to understand. Steal away home. The overseer paused, frowning. What's he saying? But no one answered. No one dared. The whip fell again. The song grew fainter. But the words, the meaning, had already spread like fire through dry grass. By the time it ended, the mist had lifted, and the sun burned white in the sky. Ben was dragged back to the wagon, bleeding, but still breathing. Clay shouted something about obedience, about punishment, about how none of them were men. But his words felt empty now. Hollow. Because beneath his shouting, beneath the crack of the whip, there was something else, something that couldn't be silenced. The rhythm of the work began again. Cotton filled the baskets, sweat fell to the ground, and yet, under it all, the people began to hum. Softly, secretly. Steal away home. At first it was just the women at the far end of the field. Then a few of the men joined in. The song was slow, careful, but steady, a heartbeat. Clay shouted again, but the humming didn't stop. Samuel joined in too, his voice low. He felt it move through him, that quiet defiance hidden beneath the sound of labor. Every note was a step. Every verse, a map. Isaac, a few rows away, caught his eye and gave a small nod. The overseer could lash them. He could chain them. But he couldn't stop the sound beneath the whip. That night, when the moon rose, Samuel walked out behind the cabins. The fields shimmered pale in the moonlight, and the frogs sang from the dark edges of the river. Isaac was already there, waiting, his lantern dimmed almost to nothing. They're listening now, he said quietly. Even the ones who were too scared before. Samuel nodded. I heard them singing. Isaac smiled, slow and tired. That's how it starts. The songs carry more than words. They tell you where to go, what to watch for. Every melody's a path. Samuel looked toward the horizon. When? Isaac's face turned serious. Soon. But we can't move too fast. The dogs are restless. The masters too. They feel something comin', they just don't know what. The night stretched long and heavy around them. Crickets sang, and the air smelled of river water and smoke. Samuel thought of Ben, of the way he'd stood tall even as the whip fell, of the blood on his back and the song on his lips. He whispered into the dark, he wasn't afraid. Isaac's gaze was steady. "Fear don't leave us," he said. "We just learn to carry it." They stood in silence for a while. The river moved, slow and dark. Far off, thunder rumbled again, distant, like a memory returning. And in that sound, Samuel could almost hear it, the echo of a song rising somewhere deep in the woods, carried by wind and water alike. That evening, the air felt thick and electric, like the world was waiting for something to break. The sky had turned the color of pewter, heavy with clouds that hung low and still. The birds had gone silent, and even the insects seemed to sense it, that strange pause before a storm, when the air hums with invisible energy. Samuel worked the fields until sunset, the horizon bruised purple and gold. Each breath tasted of rain. The overseer's shouts came less often, even he seemed uneasy. When the horn finally sounded to end the day, the first droplets began to fall, fat, cold, and deliberate. By the time Samuel reached the cabins, the rain had thickened into a downpour. The roof hissed beneath it, leaking in thin streams that gathered in puddles on the dirt floor. But no one complained. Storms brought something else besides water: cover. Isaac came to him just after nightfall, moving quietly, his face hidden under his hat. "Tonight," he whispered. Samuel froze. "You mean?" Isaac nodded. "The river's high. The hounds won't track through the flood. Ada says the signs are right, the North Star's bright, and the moon's hidin'. It's time." Samuel felt his stomach twist. The words hit him like a sudden wind. He'd imagined this moment, dreamed of it, feared it, but now that it was here, it didn't feel like a dream at all. It felt like standing at the edge of something enormous, too deep to see the bottom. "How many?" he asked. "7, Isaac said. "You, me, Ada, Lila, her brother, and 2 from the far quarters. We move when the lightning stops. The water'll hide our steps." Samuel nodded slowly. "And the others?" Isaac's eyes darkened. "We can't take everyone. Not yet. Some got babies. Some too sick to walk far. But if we make it, if we reach the line, there'll be others waitin'. We'll come back." The rain beat harder against the roof, drowning the sound of their voices. Samuel looked around the cabin. The sleeping bodies, the dim glow of a dying fire, the worn blanket that had been his only comfort for years. He folded it once, set it down gently, and stood. "I'm ready," he said. They met at the edge of the woods. The storm had passed, but the trees still dripped with rain, and mist curled low over the ground. The river roared nearby, swollen and wild, its current whispering promises and warnings alike. Ada was there already, her dress clinging to her skin, a small bundle tied to her back. Lila stood beside her, holding her brother's hand. The boy couldn't have been more than 8, his eyes wide and shining. Isaac carried a small sack food, a bit of salt pork, and a strip of cloth with stars sewn into it. Ada touched Samuel's arm. "You see that?" she said, pointing upward. The clouds had thinned just enough to reveal one bright star, steady, unwavering, fixed high in the north. The old ones used to call it the Freedom Star, she said. Said it was God's eye watchin' over those who move in the dark. Samuel stared at it for a long moment. It seemed to shimmer through the mist, its light trembling on the wet leaves. Then Isaac spoke. Stay close. We move by the water till we reach the hollow. From there, we follow the stars. Don't speak unless you must. Don't look back. They began to walk. The forest was alive with sound, the drip of rain from the branches, the distant hoot of an owl, the quiet rustle of things unseen. Each step sank into the soft earth, muffled and careful. The river moved beside them, its surface silver under the faint starlight. Samuel's heart pounded with every sound, every crack of a twig. But as the minutes stretched into hours, the rhythm of their movement began to calm him. It was like the songs, steady, patient, forward. Once, they paused near a fallen tree. Isaac knelt and pressed his ear to the ground. Riders, he whispered. Far off. Maybe half a mile. The group froze. The boy whimpered softly, and Lila pressed a hand to his mouth, whispering, "Shoo, baby, shoo." They waited. The sound of hooves faded slowly into the distance. When it was gone, Isaac gave a small nod, and they moved again. The river bent eastward, and soon they reached the hollow, a dip in the land where the trees grew thick and the air smelled of pine. There they stopped to rest. Ada pulled out a scrap of cornbread from her bundle, broke it into pieces, and passed it around. Samuel wasn't hungry, but he took it anyway. His hands trembled slightly as he ate. Lila leaned against the trunk of a tree, her eyes hollow. "Do you think they'll follow?" she asked. Isaac didn't answer at first. Then he said, "They always follow. But the river's on our side tonight." He looked at the sky. "Still got miles to go before we see the safe mark." Samuel frowned. "Safe mark." Isaac smiled faintly. "Quilt on a fence post. Means a station. There'll be food, maybe a barn to hide in. Folks that help us don't always look the same, but they know the signs." Ada added quietly, "Some sing it too. Follow the drinking gourd. That's another way of saying follow the North Star." Samuel nodded slowly. The songs he'd grown up hearing, the ones that had always seemed like hymns or lullabies, they were maps. Every melody, every verse, a message hidden in plain sight. He felt the first flicker of something that almost felt like hope. As they prepared to move again, thunder rolled faintly in the distance. Not from the storm, but from something else. Hooves. Isaac's head snapped up. "They found the trail," he hissed. The group scattered into motion. Ada grabbed her bundle, Lila lifted her brother, and Samuel followed Isaac deeper into the trees. Branches tore at their clothes, roots caught their feet, but they didn't stop. Behind them, the dogs began to bark. Samuel's breath came in short bursts. The sound of pursuit grew louder, men shouting, horses crashing through the underbrush. He could see the glimmer of lanterns between the trees. Down to the water. Isaac shouted. They slid down the bank, mud spraying under their boots. The river was higher than before, wild and cold. Without hesitation, Isaac waded in, the current tugging at his legs. "Stay close," he yelled. "The water'll wash the scent away." Samuel followed, the chill biting through his bones. Lila stumbled beside him, clutching her brother tight. Ada came last, her skirts dragging heavy with water. The current roared around them, pulling, pushing, swallowing every sound except its own. The lanterns on the far bank flickered, blurred by the mist. Then, suddenly, silence. The barking stopped. The shouting faded. The riders had lost them. They crossed to the other side, panting, soaked, but alive. For a moment, No one spoke. The only sound was the slow drip of water from their clothes and the steady murmur of the river. Isaac turned to them, eyes fierce. From here on, we move fast. The storm gave us cover. The stars'll guide us the rest of the way. He looked at Samuel. You ready, son? Samuel nodded, though his body trembled. I've been ready my whole life. They climbed up the far bank, mud clinging to their feet. The night stretched wide and endless before them. Above, the clouds parted fully for the first time, and the sky was ablaze with stars. The North Star burned brightest of all, clear and cold and steady, pointing the way north. Ada whispered, half to herself, God's lantern. And for the first time, Samuel believed it. They moved on, shadows in the forest, guided by light that never faded. The river was always near us, like a quiet witness to everything that happened on the plantation. It curved through the edge of the fields, hidden behind rows of cypress trees and Spanish moss that hung like ghosts from the branches. At night, when all else was still, you could hear it murmuring softly, a gentle, endless sound that made the world feel older than time. I used to lie awake and listen to that sound. The river had a strange kind of comfort. It didn't care who was master or who was slave. It flowed the same for everyone. Some said the river carried spirits, that it could take your pain and wash it away if you knew the right words to whisper. I never knew the words, but sometimes I whispered anyway. On nights when the moon was high and the overseer's house was dark, a few of us would sneak down to the riverbank. We'd gather in silence, our bare feet sinking into the wet earth, the cool breeze wrapping around us. There was Caleb, with his deep voice and quiet laugh, and old Ruth, who carried secrets from the days before she was brought here. She said she once lived near a river in Africa, and that this one felt like its younger brother, wild, but still learning the language of souls. Ruth would tell us stories. About home. About kings and hunters. About songs sung under stars that didn't seem so cruel. She said that water has memory. That if you speak your truth into it, the river remembers, and one day it might speak your name back. I always thought that was just a story, but it gave us hope, and sometimes that was enough. There was another reason we went down there. The river was our secret road. Not for walking, but for dreaming. We knew there were places beyond it, towns where people were free, where the law didn't chase you with dogs and whips. We heard about men who built hidden routes through the woods, helping others escape north. The word freedom wasn't spoken loud, it was breathed like a prayer. Caleb once told me, "One day I'll follow that river till it forgets my name." I didn't know what he meant at first, but I think he meant he wanted to disappear into it, to let it take him somewhere new, where the pain couldn't follow. One night, he did. It was after harvest season, when the air smelled of dry straw and smoke. The overseer had been crueler than usual that week, and Caleb had taken the blows meant for another man. His back was torn and bleeding, but he didn't cry out. That night, when everyone slept, I heard the door of the quarters creak. I followed quietly, barefoot, my heart pounding like thunder. Down by the river, I saw him standing on the bank, the moonlight cutting silver across his shoulders. He turned to me and said softly, "You hear that, Eli? The river's calling." He stepped into the water. I ran after him, whispering his name, but the current was fast, and before I could reach him, he was gone, swallowed by the dark flow. I waited there for hours, praying he'd come back, but the river kept its silence. In the morning, they found nothing. The overseer said he drowned, and that was that. No search, no sorrow. But part of me believed Ruth's words, that the river remembered. That maybe Caleb had found a place where no one called him boy anymore. 4 days after, I'd hear that same murmur outside the quarters, a soft rhythm like breathing. Sometimes I thought it said his name. Life went on, as it always did. But something changed in me after that night. Every time I looked at the river, I didn't just see water, I saw a path. A whisper of something greater waiting beyond the fields. And though I stayed, something deep inside me had already begun to move, carried quietly by that current of dreams. After Caleb vanished into the river, something in the air changed. It wasn't loud or sudden, but a quiet, steady hum, like the earth itself had begun to breathe differently. Life on the plantation moved on, as it always did, but beneath the routine, something unseen had begun to stir. I felt it first in the silences, in the way people looked at each other when the overseer's back was turned, in the sudden stillness when a name was whispered too softly. It was as if we were all waiting for something, though no one knew what exactly. Autumn deepened, and the days grew shorter. The cotton fields turned pale and brittle, the stalks snapping under our fingers as we worked. The overseer, Mr. Pike, was quick with his whip and quicker with his temper. He liked to remind us that the harvest had to be perfect. Every bowl, he'd say, every single one, God's watching. Sometimes I wondered what kind of God he thought was watching. But even as his cruelty grew, so did something else among us, a quiet defiance. It began with small things. The men would hum low songs as we worked, songs that didn't belong to the fields, songs that spoke of faraway places. Ruth started teaching the children old words from her village, words that meant things like hope, light, and return. One night, while the sky hung heavy with clouds, a group of us gathered in the smokehouse after the day's labor. The room was dark except for a single candle burning low, its flame trembling like it was afraid of what it might reveal. There were 6 of us, Ruth, me, Thomas, young Mary, and 2 others from the far side of the property. We sat in silence at first, listening to the wind creak through the walls. Then Ruth spoke. "I dreamed of Caleb," she said. "He was standing on the riverbank, smiling. Said the water carried him to a place where the sun feels soft, and no one's afraid." Mary's eyes widened. "You think he's free?" Ruth nodded slowly. "I think the river carried his spirit, and maybe his body too. But I think he's not the only one meant to follow it." The room went quiet. Everyone knew what she was saying without her saying it. The river wasn't just water anymore, it was a promise. Thomas leaned forward, his voice low. "There's talk, from the north fields. They say some men been moving through the swamps, helping folks find the way out. There's a path, hidden by night." My heart thudded. "You've seen them?" He shook his head. "Just stories. But every story starts somewhere." The candle flickered, and for a moment, the room felt different, like the walls were listening. The danger of speaking such words was heavy in the air. If anyone overheard us, there would be no mercy. Still, no one left. Ruth looked at each of us in turn. "We can't rush the river," she whispered. "It takes time to learn its song. But when it sings for you, you must be ready to listen." That night, lying on the dirt floor of the quarters, I couldn't sleep. Her words kept echoing in my head. Ready to listen. Ready to move. I thought of Caleb's footsteps vanishing into the current, of his voice saying the river was calling. I thought of the moonlight on the water, and how it looked like a path leading somewhere far beyond the reach of the overseer's whip. The next day, as we worked under the burning sun, I noticed small things I hadn't before. How the men in the north fields glanced toward the woods more often. How Ruth's humming carried a rhythm that matched the river's murmur. How Mary's eyes sparkled with something that wasn't just fear, it was the faintest trace of courage. Even the land seemed to sense it. The wind blew different, cooler, sharper, as if it had traveled from a place where chains didn't clatter. And though no one said a word, I knew what was happening. We were still slaves in the eyes of those who owned us, but something had changed in our hearts. The thought of freedom was no longer a dream whispered in secret. It was becoming a seed, buried deep, yes, but alive. And just like the cotton we picked each day, it would grow when the time was right. Winter came softly that year, though the cold did little to ease the weight of our days. The fields turned gray and stiff, the earth frozen and cracked beneath our feet. Work slowed some, but not enough to give rest. Still, it was in those slower days that the quiet plans began to take shape, plans whispered like prayers between breaths of cold air. Music carried them. You see, songs were never just songs on the plantation. They were messages, hidden, layered, alive. To the masters, they were just hymns and work chants, harmless as wind through the grass. But to us, they were maps. Sometimes when we sang about crossing the Jordan, it wasn't about heaven, it meant the river. When we sang Steal Away, it didn't mean stealing time to pray, it meant run, when the moon is right. Every note carried a secret, every rhythm a direction. At dusk, when the work was done and the air smelled of ash and damp soil, we'd gather near the edge of the woods. The cypress trees there were tall and still, their roots twisting out of the ground like dark fingers. We'd light no fire, too dangerous, but the moon was enough. Ruth would begin to hum, low and deep, a sound like the heartbeat of the earth. Then the rest of us would join in. Follow the drinking gourd, she'd sing softly, and I remember feeling a strange kind of power in those words. That song wasn't just melody, it was a guide. The drinking gourd was the Big Dipper, and its handle pointed north. If you followed it, it could lead you to freedom. Thomas, who had always been quiet, leaned close one night and whispered, "I met a man near the swamp's edge. Said he travels by moonlight. Brings messages from the north. Says there's a woman in the next county who helps people disappear." Disappear? I asked. He nodded. Freedom, Eli. Real freedom. The kind you can breathe. For a long time, I didn't answer. My heart was heavy with the thought. I had lived my whole life here, born on this land, worked its fields, felt its cruelty. Could I just walk away? Could I survive beyond the edges of the world I knew? But then I thought of Caleb, of how he'd looked that last night, calm, fearless, like he'd already stepped into a better place. Ruth noticed my silence and said quietly, "Freedom don't always come in one night. Sometimes it comes one step at a time." Her words stayed with me. In the days that followed, small changes began to appear. A tool left in a certain place. A whisper passed from field to field. A basket woven with a pattern that meant soon. The overseer noticed nothing. His eyes saw only what they wanted to see: labor, obedience, routine. But underneath it all, the air was alive. One night, as frost glittered like silver dust on the ground, Ruth took me aside. "The river's rising," she said. "The path will open soon. Be ready." "How will I know when?" I asked. She smiled faintly. "You'll hear it in the songs." The next evening, when the sun sank low and the cold wind cut through the trees, the voices rose again. But this time, the rhythm was different. The song was one I'd never heard before, slow, haunting, yet filled with something fierce and bright. "Wade in the water," they sang. "God's gonna trouble the water." The hair on my arms stood up. I understood. It was a call. That night, lying awake in the dark, I could hear the river again beyond the fields. It murmured softly, a voice both near and far, calling to those who dared to listen. I closed my eyes and whispered into the darkness, "I'm ready." The next days would change everything. Because now, freedom was no longer a story or a song. It was a path, hidden beneath moonlight and cypress shadows, waiting to be walked. The night we chose to begin, the sky was heavy with clouds, thick and low, swallowing the moonlight whole. It was the kind of night where sound traveled strangely, soft, uncertain, as if the world itself was holding its breath. We moved like shadows between the cabins, saying nothing. Every sound, a rustle of cloth, a crack of wood beneath a heel, felt loud enough to summon the overseer. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, fast and uneven. Ruth led the way. She carried nothing but a small cloth bundle tied with string, and a piece of river stone in her hand. "To remember where we came from," she said when I'd asked. Thomas followed behind her, and Mary walked beside me, clutching a worn doll she'd sewn herself. We were only 5 in all that night. The others had chosen to wait, afraid, or bound by family they could not leave. I couldn't blame them. To run was to gamble with life itself. Before we stepped into the woods, Ruth turned to us. "Listen to the trees," she whispered. "They'll tell you where the river is. Don't look for the path. Feel for it." And with that, we went. The woods behind the plantation were vast and strange, full of whispering things. Spanish moss hung low, brushing our faces as we moved. The earth was soft beneath our feet, soaked from the last rain, and the air smelled of pine and wet bark. Somewhere far off, an owl called. We didn't speak. We just followed the faint rhythm of the river, its voice hidden behind the rustle of leaves. Ruth's steps were slow but certain. She had walked through forests before long ago, and she seemed to know how to blend with the dark. Once, a branch snapped behind us, and we froze. The sound of distant hooves echoed faintly, men riding along the fence line, maybe searching, maybe just patrolling as they always did. But every sound that night felt like a threat. We crouched low until the echoes faded, our breaths shallow and silent. We kept moving until the trees began to thin, and through the darkness came the low murmur of water. The river. It stretched before us like a ribbon of black glass, the faintest shimmer of reflected starlight trembling on its surface. For a moment, no one spoke. We just stood there, listening. "This is it," Thomas whispered. "The way out." Ruth knelt at the water's edge and dipped her hand into the current. "Remember," she murmured, "the water hides you. Stay low. Stay quiet." We began to wade in, the cold biting into our legs. The current tugged gently, then stronger. The sound of it seemed to fill my entire body. Behind me, Mary stumbled, and I caught her by the arm. "It's all right," I whispered. "Hold on to me." Halfway across, I looked back. The outline of the plantation was barely visible through the trees, a few dim lanterns in the distance, a shape I had known all my life. And for the first time, it felt far away. Unreal. Ruth's voice floated back to us, "Keep moving." When we reached the far bank, the air felt different. The woods on this side were quieter, older. Somewhere beyond them lay miles of swampland, and beyond that perhaps freedom. Or death. We rested beneath a fallen tree. No one dared light a fire. Ruth unwrapped her small bundle. It held a few pieces of bread, dried roots, and something that looked like a charm made from twine and bone. She passed the bread around without a word. The wind carried a distant sound, a dog barking. Then another. Thomas's head snapped up. "They're coming." We froze. My stomach turned to ice. Ruth's eyes closed briefly, and she whispered something I didn't understand, words older than the land itself. Then she opened them and said, "Don't run fast, run smart. The river bends north. Stay near it. The dogs can't track what the water washes away." The barking grew louder now, closer. Mary began to tremble, and I held her hand tight. We slipped back into the darkness, following the riverbank, our feet sinking into the mud. Every rustle behind us felt like breath on our necks. Branches tore at our clothes. The night seemed endless, stretching on with no sky, no stars, just the sound of the river and the pounding of our hearts. Hours passed before the barking faded. We didn't stop until the first gray light began to break through the trees. My legs ached, my clothes were soaked, and my hands shook from cold and fear. But we were still alive. Ruth looked back the way we'd come, her face calm, her eyes fierce. "We've crossed," she said softly. "Now the real journey begins." And as the sun rose, faint and pale through the mist, I realized something I'd never felt before. I was no longer a slave running from something. I was a man moving toward something. Freedom wasn't just a place anymore, it was a direction. The swamp stretched out before us like a dream that didn't want to end, wet, whispering, full of secrets. Trees rose from the water like ancient bones, their roots twisted and tangled, their branches draped in hanging moss that shivered in the faint breeze. The air was thick and damp, heavy with the smell of mud and decay. Every step made a sound, soft, sucking noises as our feet sank into the wet earth. We didn't speak much. The farther we went, the less it felt like walking through a place, and more like being swallowed by it. The world of fields and cabins and overseers had vanished behind us, replaced by a living maze that felt older than memory. The river curved north, just as Ruth said it would. Sometimes we followed it close, walking in its shallows, letting the water hide our tracks. Other times we had to move through the dense thickets, crawling beneath branches or climbing over fallen logs slick with moss. The cold crept into our bones, but none of us complained. The silence between us was its own language, fear, faith, and the small glowing ember of hope that kept us moving. By the second night, the rain came. It started soft, then turned hard and wild, drumming against the trees and water until the air itself seemed to vibrate. Lightning flashed far off, turning the swamp silver for a heartbeat at a time. We huddled beneath a cluster of cypress roots, soaked and shivering. Mary cried softly, her little hands pressed to her face. Ruth pulled her close, whispering something gentle, something that sounded like a prayer in a language I didn't know. Thomas sat with his back against a tree, staring out into the rain. His jaw was clenched tight. After a long while, he said, "They'll be tracking us." Ruth nodded slowly. "Yes. But the storm is our friend tonight. The dogs can't smell through water and thunder." I tried to sleep, but my body wouldn't rest. Every sound in the swamp felt alive. Frogs croaking, insects buzzing, the splash of something unseen in the dark. I thought about the plantation, about those still left behind. Did they know we'd gone? Did they dream of following someday? Or had they already buried the thought deep inside, where it couldn't hurt? When the rain finally eased, the swamp was cloaked in mist. Steam rose from the wet ground, swirling around us like pale smoke. The dawn was gray and dim, and the world smelled of wet leaves and earth. We moved again, slower now. Hunger gnawed at our bellies. The bread was gone, the roots almost too bitter to chew. Ruth showed us how to peel bark from certain trees and find soft layers underneath that could be eaten. It wasn't much, but it kept us standing. By midday, the ground began to rise. The swamp thinned, and we came to a patch of dry land where the trees grew straighter. There we found an old wooden shack, collapsed and empty, half swallowed by vines. It must have been left by hunters long ago. Thomas searched the corners while I checked outside. No footprints. No smoke. No sign of life. It was safe, for now. Inside, Ruth laid out her charm again, the one made of twine and bone. She placed it near the doorway and whispered, "To keep bad spirits away." Then she looked at me. "You believe in spirits, Eli?" I thought for a moment. "I believe in what I can feel," I said. She smiled faintly. "Then you believe in them already." That night, I dreamed. I was standing in the river again, water up to my knees, and Caleb was there on the far bank. He didn't speak, just lifted his hand and pointed north. Behind him, The trees shimmered like gold in the morning sun. When I woke, the sound of the river was still in my ears, steady, calm, calling. We stayed in the shack one more day, letting our strength return. Thomas found a few berries in the underbrush. Mary laughed for the first time in days, the sound light and strange against the stillness of the swamp. For a moment, it almost felt like peace. But that night, as we sat in the dark, a distant sound carried through the trees, a horn. Low, mournful, unmistakable. Ruth's eyes met mine. They found our trail. No one spoke after that. We packed our things in silence, our hands trembling but sure. The swamp, the rain, the hunger, it had all been warning us that freedom was not given easily. It had to be fought for, endured for, bled for. As we stepped back into the mist, the wind rose behind us, carrying the echo of that horn. It sounded like sorrow, and like a promise. We walked faster, deeper into the unknown, the water whispering around our ankles. Somewhere ahead, north waited, and behind us, the ghosts of our old lives followed, close but fading. By the third night, the swamp seemed endless. The air hung thick, full of buzzing insects and the sour scent of rot. Every sound echoed through the stillness, the splash of our steps, the hiss of unseen creatures, the quiet rustle of something moving just beyond sight. We were tired, more tired than I'd ever known a body could be. Ruth's breathing had grown shallow, her steps slower. Mary clung to her hand, half asleep as we walked. Thomas and I moved ahead, clearing branches and testing the ground with our feet before the others followed. The horn had not sounded again, but we knew better than to believe we were safe. The mist rose higher that night, curling around the trees like smoke. It made the world smaller, closer, as if we were walking inside a dream. That's when I saw him. At first, I thought it was just the fog playing tricks, something shifting between the trees. But then a shape stepped forward. A man. He was tall and lean, wearing a dark coat and a wide-brimmed hat slick with moisture. In one hand, he carried a lantern that glowed dim and golden through the mist. In the other, a walking stick carved with strange marks. "Hold," Thomas hissed, raising his hand. The man stopped where he was. "Don't be afraid," he said quietly. His voice was deep, calm, and smooth as still water. "You look lost." Ruth stepped forward, her eyes narrow. Lost folk don't carry lanterns in the swamp unless they mean to find someone. The man smiled faintly. "Maybe I mean to. Or maybe I'm just passing through. But I reckon you're not out here by accident." No one answered. The silence stretched. The man tilted his head, studying us. "You're running north," he said finally. "Ain't my business what from. But I know the way through these parts. Safer paths. Drier ground." Thomas's jaw tightened. "Why help us?" The man's eyes gleamed in the lantern light. "Because I been where you are." He paused, and his tone softened. "Name's Moses. Not the one from the good book, but I try to do the same work." Ruth's breath caught. The name meant something. Everyone on the plantations had heard whispers of a man, or sometimes a woman, who guided the lost to freedom under cover of night. Some called them Moses. Some said it was many people using one name. Others said it was just a story to keep hope alive. I didn't know which one I wanted it to be. "You're saying you can lead us out?" I asked quietly. He nodded once. "If you trust me." The fog swirled around us. Trust was a dangerous thing, but staying meant death. Ruth looked to me, then to Thomas. Her voice was steady. "If he means us harm, we'll know soon enough." Moses smiled again, a tired, knowing smile. "That's fair." He turned and began to walk, his lantern light bobbing through the mist. "Stay close," he called softly. "The swamp eats those who stray." And so we followed. He led us along paths that wound through dry ridges and narrow crossings, places where the ground was firmer and the air less foul. Sometimes he would stop suddenly, kneel, and touch the earth, feeling it as though listening to something beneath. "Patrol's been through here," he'd murmur, "or we're close to a safe house." Another half day. Safe house. The word sounded strange and fragile, like a dream you didn't dare touch. That night, we reached a patch of ground higher than the rest. There stood an old barn, leaning and broken but still standing. Inside, the air smelled of straw and smoke. A small fire burned in a hollow pit, and beside it sat a woman. Her hair was gray, her face worn but kind. Moses nodded toward her. "This here's Miss June. She keeps watch. Helps those on the road." The woman looked up, her eyes sharp and warm all at once. "You poor souls," she said softly. "Come in. Rest. You've made it farther than most." For the first time in days, we sat in real warmth. The fire crackled gently. Mary fell asleep in Ruth's lap, her tiny chest rising and falling to the rhythm of the flames. Thomas and I shared a bit of cornbread Miss June gave us. It was the best thing I'd tasted in years. Moses sat near the doorway, staring out into the dark. I watched him, still unsure. There was something unreadable in his eyes. Kindness, maybe, but something heavier too. A burden he carried in silence. After a while, I asked, "How many have you helped?" He didn't look at me when he answered. "Enough to keep going. Not enough to rest." Outside, the wind picked up, shaking the barn walls. Somewhere far off, a faint echo, maybe thunder, maybe something else. Moses rose, adjusted his coat, and said quietly, "We move again at dawn. The next part's harder. But if we make it past the marsh ridge, there's a riverboat waiting 3 days north. It'll take you farther than your feet ever could." He looked at me then, eyes reflecting the firelight. "You got the heart of a leader, boy. Don't lose it. Freedom's not just where you end up, it's what you carry with you." And for a long time after he spoke, I sat there in the warmth, listening to the rain start again outside. For the first time since leaving the plantation, I felt something stir deep inside, something that almost felt like faith. We left before dawn, when the world was still wrapped in mist and pale light. Miss June pressed a bundle of food into Ruth's hands. Cold cornbread, dried apples, a little smoked fish. "You'll need it," she said, her voice low and hurried. "Keep the girl close, and don't stop for anyone but him." She nodded toward Moses. He stood near the doorway, lantern unlit, coat buttoned high. His presence seemed to command silence. Even the frogs in the swamp held their breath when he moved. The morning was quiet but tense. Every step north felt heavier than the last. The trees grew closer, their roots twisting through the soil like veins, and the air smelled of salt. The river was near. Moses walked ahead, steady, confident. He didn't speak often, but when he did, it was like he already knew what we were thinking. "You'll want to hurry," he murmured once. "The dogs are slower in the heat, but not slow enough." We followed his lead for hours, through patches of fog and stretches of dry grass that whispered against our clothes. When we stopped to rest, I noticed something, the faint outline of an old scar running down his neck, like a rope had once bitten deep there. He caught me looking and smiled. "Old memory," he said. "The kind that don't fade, even when you do." That night, we found shelter in an abandoned cabin by the river. Its roof sagged in the middle, and the walls leaned like tired shoulders, but it was dry. Inside, Moses built a small fire and warmed a pot of beans Miss June had given us. The flames flickered against the wooden walls, painting them in soft gold. For the first time in weeks, we dared to laugh. Mary found a cracked mirror on the wall and stared at her reflection, touching her hair curiously. Thomas hummed an old hymn under his breath, one we'd sung in the fields when the overseer wasn't listening. But peace is a fragile thing. It doesn't stay long. Near midnight, I woke to the sound of footsteps outside. Slow, careful, almost deliberate. I thought it was Moses checking the trail. But when I looked around, he wasn't there. The fire had burned low, casting the room in half-darkness. I moved to the window and peered out. There, between the trees, was a faint glow. A lantern. But it wasn't Moses's. His light had a softer color, steady and warm. This one flickered sharp, cold, like a warning. Then I saw him, a man crouched behind a fallen log, holding the lantern low, whispering to someone else hidden in the brush. My stomach turned cold. I shook Thomas awake. He was up in an instant, eyes alert. When he saw the glow, he swore under his breath. Bounty men. We grabbed our few things, the blanket, the food, Ruth's worn shawl, and shook Ruth gently. She woke Mary, still half asleep, and we slipped toward the back door. But before we could move, the front door creaked open. Moses stepped inside, calm as ever. He looked at us, then at the window where the lantern's glow still shimmered. His face gave nothing away. "They're close," Thomas hissed. "We have to go." "Already taken care of," Moses said quietly. Outside, the glow vanished. Silence. Not even the frogs dared to make a sound. Ruth stared at him. "You led them away?" He nodded once, expression grave. "We had a tale since yesterday." I doubled back. We waited for more explanation, for how or why or what he'd done, but he said nothing else. He just sat by the dying fire, pulling a small piece of paper from his coat. It was torn, smudged with dirt, but covered in symbols. A map. I asked. "A path," he corrected. "Not one that's written down anywhere. Each marks a friend, a place, or a warning. We follow it north until the river forks." He looked at me then, eyes tired but sharp. "You'll need to remember it too, in case I don't make it that far." The words struck something deep inside me. Why wouldn't you? He smiled faintly, though it didn't reach his eyes. Freedom takes payment. Sometimes it's just time. Sometimes it's something else. None of us slept that night. We left before first light, keeping to the shadows. The air smelled of mud and iron. Behind us, faintly, came the howl of dogs, distant but real. By midday, the heat pressed down like a heavy hand. Ruth carried Mary on her back, sweat darkening her dress. Thomas walked behind us, always turning to check the trail. Moses led us along a narrow ridge where the water below shimmered like melted glass. It was there we met the ferryman. He stood by an old boat tethered to a stump, his clothes ragged but his eyes quick and clever. "You the ones Moses was talking about?" he asked, voice low. Moses nodded. "They need to cross." The man looked us over, tired faces, torn clothes, fear in every breath, and finally motioned to the boat. "Two at a time. Quietly." The crossing was slow. The river was wide and black, reflecting the clouds above. The air was thick with mosquitoes, and each stroke of the oar sounded louder than thunder. When it was my turn, Moses came too. We sat in silence, the boat rocking softly beneath us. Halfway across, I asked what had been burning in my chest since the night before. "You ever get tired of running?" He didn't answer right away. Then softly, "Freedom don't mean rest. It means choosing your road, even when it hurts." The water rippled around us, catching the faint glow of dawn breaking behind the trees. On the far shore, the ferryman helped Ruth and Mary out of the boat. Thomas followed, clutching the small bundle of food. Then Moses stepped out last, looked back across the river, and froze. A shout. Dogs barking. Men's voices cutting through the fog. The hunters had found the trail again. And before we could even catch our breath, the world erupted into motion. The chase had begun anew. The sound of dogs was like a blade through the morning. Short, sharp, and close enough to slice the air we breathed. Run! Moses hissed, already moving toward the trees. The ferryman cursed under his breath, shoving the empty boat into the current to let it drift downstream, buying us a few precious minutes of confusion for whoever came next. We ran. The forest swallowed us, thick with vines and twisted roots. Every branch seemed to reach out to slow us down. The air was hot and damp, heavy with the smell of earth and sweat and fear. Behind us, the shouts grew louder, the clatter of boots on the far bank, the barking of hounds unleashed. Thomas stumbled once, caught himself, and kept going. Ruth carried Mary on her back again, whispering prayers between gasps of breath. Moses led the way, weaving through the trees like he knew every turn by heart. "This way," he called softly, and we followed. We came to a ravine choked with fallen logs. The water below was shallow but fast, rushing over rocks slick with moss. Moses stopped, glanced back toward the shouts echoing through the woods. "They'll track us easy if we stay on the ground," he said quickly. We crossed through the stream, let the water steal our scent. Without hesitation, he splashed into the current, motioning for us to follow. The water was cold, biting at our legs, but it was the only way. We moved upstream, the current pulling at our clothes, the roar of the water drowning out the noise of pursuit. For a few moments, I believed we might actually lose them. Then, a gunshot. The sound tore through the forest, sharp and final. Ruth cried out, clutching Mary tight. The bullet had struck a nearby tree, splintering bark where her head had been moments before. "They're too close." Thomas shouted. Moses turned, his face grim. "Keep moving. I'll slow them down." "No." I started forward, but he was already climbing up the bank, pulling a small pistol from inside his coat. His movements were calm, steady, deliberate. "Moses." Ruth called after him. "You'll be killed." He looked back once, a faint smile beneath the brim of his hat. "I've been killed before." And then he was gone into the trees. We didn't wait. We couldn't. Thomas took the lead now, pulling Ruth by the arm as we pushed through the stream, stumbling over roots and stones. The shouts behind us grew louder, scattered with the echo of more gunfire. When we finally climbed out of the ravine, the world fell silent again. Only the rushing water below and the thrum of our hearts remained. We stopped in a small clearing surrounded by cypress trees. Ruth set Mary down on a patch of dry ground, and the child clung to her mother's arm, wide-eyed and shaking. Thomas leaned against a tree, breathing hard. "Moses," he whispered. "He ain't coming back, is he?" No one answered. The sun broke through the trees then, a dull red bleeding through the morning mist. It painted the forest floor in long trembling lines of gold. We waited there for what felt like hours. Every rustle made us flinch. Every shadow looked like the shape of a man. Then, just when I'd begun to think we were alone for good, a figure appeared at the edge of the clearing. Moses. He moved slowly, limping. His hat was gone, his coat torn, but he was alive. In one hand, he still held his lantern, though the glass was cracked and the flame inside flickered weakly. Ruth ran to him. "You're hurt." "Not enough to stop," he said, wincing as he sat down beside the fallen log. "We bought ourselves a little time. But they'll keep coming." He looked at me then, his voice low. You ready to lead? I froze. Me. He nodded. If I fall, someone's gotta carry the road. Freedom don't wait for one man. I didn't know what to say. My throat burned, not from running but from fear. Fear of failing, fear of believing too much. Moses smiled faintly, seeing it all in my face. You remind me of myself, he murmured. Back when I thought freedom was a place you could walk to. He leaned back, staring at the canopy above. The sunlight shifted, breaking into beams that danced through the mist. Truth is, he said softly, freedom starts long before you cross the line. It starts the moment you know you deserve it. No one spoke for a long while. Even the forest seemed to listen. When we moved again, Moses walked slower, leaning on his stick. The path grew steeper, winding toward higher ground. From the ridge, we could see the river stretching endlessly to the north, silver and quiet beneath the rising sun. That's when we saw it, smoke in the distance. A thin column curling into the sky. Thomas tensed. A town. Moses squinted. Could be a safe house. Or it could be something else. We didn't know yet, but the road, like freedom, only went one way, forward. And so we walked toward the smoke, hearts pounding, unsure if what waited beyond the trees would be salvation, or the end of the line. By noon, the trees thinned and the river spread wide and calm, glinting in the sunlight like a blade. The smoke we'd seen rose from a cluster of small houses along the bank, wooden walls patched with tin, roofs leaning but sturdy enough to last another year. At first glance, it looked peaceful. Too peaceful. The kind of quiet that makes your skin crawl. Moses slowed, leaning heavier on his stick. His coat was dark with sweat, and each step seemed to cost him more. Still, he moved with purpose, his eyes fixed on the little settlement below. That's it, he murmured. The last stop before the boats. Ruth shaded her eyes. You sure it's safe? As safe as any place gets in this world, he said. But stay close. Not everyone who smiles is your friend. We followed him down the slope. Chickens clucked between the houses, and a few thin dogs barked lazily as we passed. The smell of cooked beans drifted from somewhere nearby, so ordinary it almost broke me. I hadn't realized until then how long it had been since we'd seen something like life continuing. A man came out from one of the shacks as we approached. He was middle-aged, with skin dark as the river mud and a face lined deep from sun and worry. He carried a small pipe in one hand, unlit. When he saw Moses, his eyes widened. Well, I'll be, he said, breaking into a grin. Didn't think I'd see you walk in these woods again, old man. Moses gave a tired nod. Still walking. Barely. The man's gaze shifted to us, Ruth, Thomas, little Mary, and me. His smile softened. You brought company. They're bound for the riverboat, Moses said. The man's face grew serious. Then they better eat first. Come on. He led us to a cabin near the edge of the water. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of salt and wood smoke. A woman sat by the window, mending a torn shirt. She looked up, and her eyes, sharp gray and kind, met ours. More travelers? She asked. Her husband nodded. Moses's people. She rose without another word and began setting out food. Biscuits, beans, and a bit of salted fish. It wasn't much, but it felt like a feast. Mary ate quietly, her small hands trembling as she lifted the bread to her mouth. Ruth kept whispering thanks. The woman smiled gently. Don't thank me yet. The hard part's still ahead. Thomas frowned. You mean the riverboat? She nodded, sitting again by the window. The captain's a good man. but the patrol's been heavy this week. They've taken to checking cargo and passengers. My stomach tightened. So it's not safe. Safe. Moses gave a soft, humorless laugh. Ain't no such thing in this business. Only choices. The man turned to him. You'll be crossing too, won't you? For a long moment, Moses didn't answer. Then quietly he said, No. My road ends here. The words hit harder than I expected. What do you mean? I asked. He looked at me, eyes steady. You're ready now. The path beyond this point, you have to walk it yourself. You'll find a man named Captain Elijah down by the docks after dark. He'll take you across if the wind's right. Ruth stared at him. And you? Moses smiled faintly, the corners of his mouth trembling. There's more work behind me than ahead. Every soul I guide north buys one more chance for the next. Thomas shook his head. You can't go back. They'll kill you. Moses looked out the window, where the river shimmered like liquid glass. They've been trying to do that a long time. The woman by the window sighed softly. He's right. Some folks are meant to walk both sides of the river. That evening, the sun bled low over the horizon, and the little settlement came alive with quiet preparation. The ferryman's boat waited at the far dock, a narrow vessel hidden beneath canvas and reeds. The air hummed with the steady rhythm of crickets and frogs, a sound that somehow made the danger feel even closer. Before we left, Moses called me aside. His lantern was dark now, the glass cracked from the chase. He handed it to me anyway. Take this, he said. The flame's gone, but the light's in the memory. Keep it close. I held it, the metal still warm from his hand. Will I see you again? He smiled, that same tired, quiet smile. If you keep walking, maybe. Every road north carries my shadow somewhere. The others were already waiting by the river's edge. Ruth with Mary in her arms, Thomas carrying our last small bundle of food. The ferryman stood at the boat, whispering to the current as if it might listen. We climbed aboard. As the oars dipped into the dark water, I turned back. Moses stood on the bank, his coat fluttering in the wind, one hand raised in farewell. The fog had begun to rise again, wrapping around him until he seemed more ghost than man. And then he was gone. The river carried us north, silent and steady. The current whispered beneath the boat, carrying us toward a place we had never seen but had dreamed of all our lives. Ruth hummed softly, a song I didn't know, something between a prayer and a promise. Thomas leaned back, eyes closed, murmuring the same word over and over under his breath. Freedom. And though the night was long and danger waited on every shore for the first time, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, we'd live to see the dawn. Night settled thick over the river, the sky heavy and low, a mirror of black water beneath it. The ferryman rowed in silence, each pull of the oars sending ripples that shimmered with faint starlight. The forest along the banks drifted by like shadows half alive, their shapes bending in the mist. No one spoke. No one dared. Every creak of wood or whisper of current could mean discovery. We traveled for hours before the ferryman finally lifted his oars and let the boat drift. Ahead, a faint glimmer, a lantern swaying slowly in the darkness. Then, a shape materialized from the fog, a large flat vessel moored along the northern bank. The Riverboat. Its hull was painted black, its name barely visible on the side, the Providence. The ferryman turned to us. That's your passage, he said quietly. Captain Elijah's inside. Wait till I give the signal before you board. Ruth clutched Mary close, whispering something soft against her hair. Thomas squeezed her shoulder once, his face set but pale. I held Moses's cracked lantern tight against my chest, as if it might still hold some protection. The ferryman cupped his hands and let out a low whistle, 3 notes, rising and falling. From the deck of the riverboat, a light flashed twice in reply. "All right," the ferryman said. "Move quick and keep low." We climbed out one by one, the planks beneath our feet slick with dew. The ferryman went ahead, leading us to a narrow stair that rose to the cargo deck. Every board seemed to groan louder than it should have, but the river drowned most of the sound. At the top, a man waited, a tall figure in a long coat, lantern light glinting off the brass buttons at his chest. "Captain Elijah?" I whispered. He nodded once. His voice, when he spoke, was deep and measured. "You're the ones Moses sent?" "Yes," Thomas said, still catching his breath. "He told us you could help." The captain's eyes flicked over us, quick, assessing, not unkind but wary. "You'll stay below deck till we're past the checkpoint. After that, it's 2 days of priver to the crossing at Cairo. Understand?" We nodded. He motioned toward the open hatch. "Go." Quietly. The space below deck was small, smelling of tar and damp wood. Crates were stacked high on both sides, and in the far corner, an old blanket lay across a few barrels. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. We huddled close, listening as footsteps moved above us. The boat groaned as the ropes were cast off, and slowly, the Providence began to drift. The sound of the current against the hull was almost soothing, steady, rhythmic, alive. For a moment, it almost felt safe. But that peace didn't last long. An hour later, the engine slowed. The footsteps above grew sharper. Then came a voice, not the captain's. Rough, commanding. "Inspection. Open your cargo." Ruth's hand clamped around mine. I could feel her trembling. Thomas's eyes went wide. "Patrol," he mouthed silently. The hatch above creaked. Light spilled in, a cold white beam that cut through the dark. The sound of boots on the stairs followed, slow and deliberate. Then Captain Elijah's voice, calm but tight. "Just grain and tools, sir. Nothing worth your trouble." A pause. Then the rough voice again. "We'll see about that." A man descended halfway, lantern in hand. He swept the beam across the cargo hold, and stopped. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. The lantern's light passed inches from Ruth's face. She bent low, clutching Mary against her chest, her eyes closed. The man's boots thudded against the deck as he stepped down, the wood creaking under his weight. He took another step, then froze. Behind him, Captain Elijah spoke softly. "I wouldn't do that." The man turned, his hand going to his pistol. "What are you?" A sharp crack cut through the air. The patrolman collapsed where he stood, his lantern shattering on the floor. The light flickered once, then died. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Elijah hissed, "Up. Now." We scrambled out from hiding. Above deck, the river was darker than ever, the mist curling low around the boat. Elijah stood by the railing, pistol still smoking, eyes hard. "They'll know soon," he said. "We don't have much time." Thomas stared at him, voice shaking. "You killed him." "I saved you," Elijah snapped. Then softer, "And I'll have to do it again if you don't move." He turned to the ferryman, who was already untying a smaller skiff tethered to the back. "Take them the rest of the way. The soldiers will be looking for the Providence before long." Ruth hesitated. "You're not coming?" Elijah shook his head. "Someone has to steer this boat into their sights. Buy you the time to get clear." Before we could argue, he grabbed my shoulder. "Keep north. When the river forks, follow the narrow branch. You'll find people waiting. Tell them Elijah sent you." The ferryman motioned for us to climb down. The skiff rocked gently as we boarded, Ruth and Mary first, then Thomas, then me. Elijah pushed us off with a strong shove, his face barely visible in the fog. "Go," he said. The skiff drifted into the current. Behind us, the riverboat began to move again, slow at first, then faster as it turned downstream. Its lanterns glowed faintly through the mist, until suddenly, the night erupted in flashes of gunfire. We ducked low, the ferryman rowing hard, his arms straining with each pull. The noise echoed across the water, shouts, shots, then silence. And just like that, the Providence was gone. Only the river remained, endless, silent, carrying us forward into a darkness that felt both terrifying and infinite. Ruth held Mary close, whispering the same words again and again. I couldn't hear them, but I knew what they were. "Keep going." The current pulled us onward, and the fog closed behind us like a curtain. Somewhere beyond it, freedom waited, or something that looked like it. But none of us spoke. Not yet. Not while the echoes of the gunfire still haunted the air.